Hey folks, and welcome to another episode of Crit Hit Reviews with your host, Arlyeon. On today's episode, I'll be talking about the review copy I received of Awesome Games Studios' side-scrolling roguelite, Fury Unleashed. Find out if I thought its gunplay-riddled gameplay was worth a reload, or if I came away with the feeling it was shooting blanks. This dramatic reenactment by Arlyeon. The world is in peril, and Fury must save it yet again. It's a story that's retold countless times, in issue after issue of the comic book, and yet there's something different this time. Forces from outside the pages are leading to his story growing stagnant. Guided only by the mysterious Mr. Doodle, Fury must fight his way through the arcs of these stories in an effort to once more inspire his creator. I shouldn't do that. That fucking plays hell with my voice. But anyways, on a narrative front, it's an interesting concept due to the layering of the comic book character's journey alongside his creator's struggle with the loss of inspiration and burnout. And given they were fairly sparse in their appearance, they never actually overstayed their welcome. So, while there actually isn't that much to fuss over for the story, what is there is genuinely nice and does manage to touch on some interesting themes. Anyways, with all them lore bits out of the way, let's move on to the mechanics. Fury Unleashed has the protagonist navigating across its pulpy comic book world in a prolonged, rage-filled rampage through its randomly generated stages. If you manage to make your way to the end of a comic, you'll then come face to face with one of 3 thematically appropriate bosses for that story. Strictly speaking, it's a simple enough experience to get into, given you'll primarily find yourself concerned with weaving between screens of angry antagonists and tricky traps, while slashing, shooting, and nading them into oblivion. I mean, there's also your Fury power, which can do things like create a gun drone, give you a temporary rate of fire, crit boost, or even slowing time, but these powers tend to be short-lived and also recharge via kills rather than cooldown, so I mostly sat on them unless it was a mini or main boss fight. Instead, what I found really added some nuance to this experience was the way that it emphasized comboing, specifically chaining together kills. Given that to maintain a combo you're required to maneuver through various rooms without being hit by enemies or obstacles, it can end up being a challenging endeavor. Plus, there's some pressure in the form of a time limit as your combo automatically ends if you cannot kill fast enough. Whilst you can extend this time by smacking enemies, objects, or just visiting NPCs, it does make backtracking a bit of a hassle, especially since the game both allows and expects you to continue comboing between rooms and even levels. The reason for this, though, is because combos play a large role in the generation of the resources you'll use to advance. Serving to multiply the gold ink enemies drop, which you use as currency at shops, this also applies to black ink, which is Fury Unleashed's equivalent to experience. Now, leveling in this case provides Fury with a permanent form of progression in the form of perks that can be customized between runs. Some are fairly simple, like increasing his health, providing him more nades, or even allowing him to use the handy-dandy fast travel feature more often. That said, there's a number of them which also loop back into the importance of comboing, such as the finesse-oriented combo shields, which are generated when you reach a certain combo score. Now, in and of themselves, they're fairly potent, given they each negate damage once, but they can also be burned to ensure a combo isn't lost if you don't have anything to gank for a bit. Plus, some of the later perks you can opt into also synergize with this system by powering up while you're under the influence of combo shields, doing things like increasing your crit rate or reducing your reload time. It's a legitimately neat system that goes a long way towards helping you to customize your approach to the game, and really helps facilitate things in the long run. That said, the value of the black ink is only really important in the game's initial difficulties. Both Incredible and Legendary mode instead place a much greater emphasis on a player's skill by limiting progression to whatever's gained during a given run. Well, almost. To be fair, provided you're a diligent explorer, there are weapon schematics that can be found in challenge rooms, which unlock new types of weapons for future runs, and that does carry over to higher difficulties. That said, I found these often serve as side grades rather than strict improvements over your arsenal. A more noticeable limitation would be the fact that during your base playthroughs, you're actually able to start the game in later comic book worlds, provided you've cleared their predecessor a set number of times. Whilst it's pretty convenient, especially if you're working on filling out in areas bestiary or just trying to challenge all the mini-bosses or bosses unique to a given comic issue, it's not an option available to you when you ascend to higher difficulties. What I also found noteworthy was the fact that as far as features go, it's also disabled when you reach the game's climax for the first time, as you cannot actually backtrack until you beat the last boss. And that was admittedly a bit inconvenienced the first time I got there, since the final area isn't really rife with black ink. Nonetheless, that climatic area was pretty enjoyable, and once I got the hang of its specific quirks, I was able to wrap things up neatly enough. But that said, let's move on to the visuals, since there is a bit I have to say here. First off, I'm pretty fond of the game's over-the-top vibe. It embraced a cartoonish level of cheesiness that I found myself appreciating, and each of the areas had a noticeable visual flavor. And I just really dug some of the elements, like the edges of the rooms being comic panels, or the level maps being a 2-page comic spread. There's a whole lot of silliness to it, up to and including the NPC character design, and I just found it incredibly charming. And it definitely got compounded when the game incorporated the means of customizing Fury, which is why I'm running around to this video with the crit hit logo as my head. It's pretty extra admittedly, but it's definitely something fun to do. And on the audio side of things, the soundtrack's neat, but the element that I actually found notable was that the tunes you're listening to grow more intense as your combo level ramps up, essentially rewarding your eradication efficiency with better jams to groove to. That said, I'll admit that over time, my brain just started to tune out chunks of it. With all that out of the way though, let's dive into the conclusion, and initially, my experience with the game was a bit lukewarm, as Fury's repertoire starts out a bit limited. That said, as I began to experiment with the arsenal of weapons to be found, I found myself charmed, something which only grew as I found myself stumbling across brand new mini and main bosses in areas I'd already cleared, which helped to keep my runs fresh. And the perk system really helped to incentivize my continued runs as I figured out how best to zip through the stages, leaving a trail of destruction in my wake. It wasn't just the capacity for calamity that helped to cultivate my fondness for the game, however. Like I said in the story segment, I actually found its narrative to have a surprising resonance, and it actually hit home for me, both as someone who serves as a creator as well as someone that followed a number of creators. I definitely appreciate what's there, and it manages to do a decent job of both progressing the plotline without drowning the players in an excess of cutscenes, and it was just neat to see something thematic like Burnout being covered in an action game. And honestly, as far as Roguelite goes, I'd consider it an altogether accessible title, and one that I'd rank as a decent hit. I should, however, stipulate that this is me having played the game entirely on my own. There is in fact a co-op system, but I never got the chance to really venture into it with anyone, so my personal experiences don't take into account where I would like to meander through this with a player too. Anywho, thanks for tuning in. If you agree, disagree, or just have something to say to me, feel free to comment. If you have an interest in supporting my efforts to create new indie reviews, interviews, and gaming content, hit the subscribe button and the bell so you know there's a new release. There's also a Discord, links in the description, so you can become a part of our community, Crit Hit Cauldron. That said, I'll catch you on the next episode of Crit Hit. Take care till then, folks.